It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Joining us from New York, Noor Ibrahim, Daily Beast Deputy World Editor. How's your end of year going?
Pretty good so far, thanks.
Pretty good so far. Okay. Still have 2 weeks to go. With us as well, Borzu Dargah, international correspondent for The Independent. How are things?
Pretty good, thank you.
Pretty good. Okay, we've got two pretty good so far. Catherine Field, Europe correspondent for New Zealand Media and Entertainment. How are things?
Oh, I'm great.
You're great. Okay.
Yeah, we're good. Ready to go.
All right. Upping the stakes here. From Brussels, France 24 correspondent Dave Keating. Are you limping out of that EU summit?
Because, yeah, I'm feeling much less good than everyone else just because I'm exhausted from that late night EU summit last night.
Okay. Well, we'll try to energize you by saying that The World This Week is where you can listen in the car. You could subscribe to the podcast version on Spotify,
Nice.
Apple Podcasts, and other fine streaming services. After Boris Johnson's non-denial denial of a staff Christmas party at Downing Street, this at the height of lockdown a year ago, the verdict of the people coming in a Thursday by-election in the rural West Midlands.
Tonight, the people of North Shropshire have spoken on behalf of the British people. They've said loudly and clearly, Boris Johnson, the party is over.
And if you want more obvious puns from the new Member of Parliament for North Shropshire, she was back at it again this Friday in the company of the Lib Dems' former party leader.
3, 2, 1.
Catherine Field?
Party's up. Party's up. Time to go, Boris.
No,
You know,
he's
come on,
still,
yeah.
he's got a majority of 78 instead of 79
It's got
or
nothing
something?
to do with the majority. It's to do with the party. If the Conservative Party feel that he's a liability, it's time to go. And I would suggest, because, you know, when politicians start losing power, the flunkies tend to disappear. So now is the time to get those photos, Boris, with that €980 a roll wallpaper that he's had put into Downing Street. Make sure everything's packed up, get your souvenirs, because when the backbenchers get going, they are going to move with a speed that he won't see coming.
That he won't see coming? What, you think?
Well,
this
he's
is
not seen anything so far, has he? He didn't sort of imagine that the whole country would be absolutely outraged by a prime minister who lied to the Queen, took an unconstitutional move to prorogue Parliament, held parties in Downing Street when the rest of the country was in lockdown, has, now we understand just tonight, put this senior civil servant in charge of the investigation, who he now apparently was at a party at held a party as well. I mean, this is starting to stink, and people, I think, are just exhausted. They see the country isn't being run well. Brexit has been done. They just want someone responsible at the helm.
I mean, we're waiting for the other shoe to drop, but is the other shoe, what is it? There was The Independent, your publication, talking about a party in May where they ate pizza outdoor or something?
I mean, he is not a conventional politician, and it was always sort of an experimental kind of flirtation between the British public and Boris Johnson. And many had predicted that at some point there would be a sort of tipping point where people would just get fed up. And they've tolerated a lot. They've tolerated a lot of his antics, his unprofessionalism, his apparent lack of enthusiasm for the actual mechanics of the job, his alleged laziness when it comes to having a certain kind of work ethic. And this issue of this party, the celebration that is coming just as another wave is cresting in the UK and causing people a lot of hardship right around the holidays, it just sort of hits a certain point with a lot of people in the UK.
But I disagree there, though, that everyone did know what Boris Johnson was like. Remember when he was Foreign Secretary? He would disappear for ages. He would go off and write bits of his book about Winston Churchill. Everyone knew his work ethic, and they were prepared to put up with...
And they knew he was lying when he had the red bus, but that didn't stop them from voting for Brexit or for voting for him as Prime Minister.
Yeah, but Brexit has been done now. Brexit, as they say, he got Brexit done. He did it. Now he's a liability. He's gone from being an asset to a liability.
All right, well, let's hear from the Prime Minister, because he says he's received this message loud and clear.
clearly the vote in North Shropshire is a very disappointing result, and I totally understand people's frustrations. Of course, I understand that what voters want us as the government to be doing at all times is to focus on them and on their priorities. And my job as Prime Minister is to get the focus onto the stuff that really matters to all of us.
Noor Ibrahim, apology accepted, you think? Was he convincing listening to that?
No way, way too little, too late. And I think that, what this really showed is he's not as bulletproof as we thought he was. I think from an outside perspective, a lot of us were scratching our heads thinking, this person's been involved in scandal after scandal, endless COVID and Brexit drama, and just thinking, how does he keep, making it out at the top at the end of the day? So I think this shows, I agree with Catherine, that there's a limit to the public's patience, and it's showing in this way where, a seat that was super, super secure for almost, I think, 2 centuries is now, this is the result of that. So it's definitely a sign that, the tide is changing, and it's very bad news for Boris Johnson. I don't think there's any turning back from that, not after, that Christmas party debacle and, with this new variant tearing through the UK. I think enough is enough at this point.
Hey, Dave Keating, if your backbench is starting to waver, why not pick another fight with Brussels in that case?
Yeah, and there's plenty of areas where he could do that, although they have kind of backed off on fisheries. I think there was some speculation here that as things got more politically difficult for him at home, he might up the stakes on fisheries on Northern Ireland. We haven't seen that. There's basically been a truce called until the beginning of January. They had their last talks on Northern Ireland today. It's not going to resume until January. I've been told this is not going to be a Brexit Christmas. It's not like last Christmas. It could be a Russian Christmas. We don't know, but don't expect any news on that. So apparently he's not giving into that temptation. I should say, though, that here in Brussels, there is a feeling that Boris Johnson is just not a prime minister they can work with anymore. He's completely lost trust in all European capitals. So there's a hope,
Does he care?
I would say, that he would go in the early part of next year and that there would be a new prime minister. Well, the problem is I don't think people think that even a new conservative prime minister is going to move the needle much in terms of these issues, because these issues are so intractable. And I'm not sure that people in the UK actually really care who Brussels thinks should be the prime minister.
All right, so he could pick a fight with Brussels, which he's not so far, according to Dave. He could also do something else, which is pick a fight with the French. Perhaps he reads sometimes the Daily Mail. This Friday, they had a big spread. The French basically canceling Christmas. So this was the headline: Spiteful Macron bans UK tourists. Catherine Field.
Yeah, when there's nothing left, blame the French, really, isn't it? The French are right. You put in more restrictions. But
The restrictions are pretty harsh, though. We had
they're
the announcement
much the same as last
coming in
year.
as Thursday. You can't go if you're a tourist. You can't go for business travel.
Yeah, you couldn't do the same. Remember last year when there was the Kent variant, which we now call the Delta variant? They had the same measures. Yes, this is serious issues, serious health issues. You can tell that the French are putting things in place so as their health service doesn't come under strain when the numbers start picking up here after Christmas. And I shouldn't really do this, but I take issue with Boris Johnson saying, I've heard what the people want. The people have wanted the same thing all the time, good governance, and he has not provided that. And so pick a fight with France.
All right, is the Daily Mail right? Is there an element of spite? Is France getting back at Boris Johnson over all the other stuff?
I don't think so. I don't think that's how governments work. I don't think that's how the French government works. I think that basically, from my understanding of how the mechanics of all of this work is, the health officials, no one wants to lose the money of all those UK tourists coming in. I mean, how this happens is that the hospital workers start complaining to the hospital bosses, the hospital bosses start complaining to the local officials. The officials go to the minister goes to the president and says, look, we need to do this, this, and this. And the president makes a decision reluctantly. And that's how it's been in many countries, not just France. And so I don't think that there's an element of spite there. It's probably just a health recommendation.
By the way, at that EU summit, Dave, there was a lot of fighting over the fact that, or jousting, if you will, over COVID measures. Because, yeah, Omicron is running rampant. Some countries are tightening their restrictions. Some are loosening their restrictions. It's not just between France and the UK.
No, but it was noticeable that last night there's a split over some countries have started requiring testing for travel within the EU. EU countries have had an agreement with each other to allow hassle-free travel within the Union for the past 6 months. And Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron did a press conference together last night after the summit, and they were asked about this, and they said they don't agree with this testing. They want to keep fully hassle-free testing for vaccinated people within the EU, no tests. So it was notable that Macron said that while he is imposing these restrictions on the UK. I'm not quite so convinced that this isn't entirely political. I don't think it's out of spite, but there's a practicality here. Macron can impose restrictions on a country outside the EU. He cannot impose these restrictions on a country in the EU, at least as long as he adheres to this agreement that's in place for the past 6 months, and which he said last night he will continue adhering to. So it is a very public measure he can take to make it look like he's doing something with the only country that he's really able to do it to, the only close country, which is the UK. So that may be something to do with it, I think.
Noor Ibrahim, there's a lot of uncertainty on this continent. You know, we don't know. People are trying to make plans, and they don't know what's going to happen next. Give it to us straight here, because it's only been 5 weeks since you've been letting us Europeans back to New York City. Are you guys going to shut it down too?
I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but what I can say is that what's happening in New York has been really alarming. I think COVID rates have doubled just in the past 3 days. And I think that what's so scary about this is just how fast it's moving. It feels like, you know, just the other day we were hearing about Omicron in the first place, and now it's everywhere. And yeah, there is just so much uncertainty about this variant, especially in terms of how effective vaccines are against it. And there's this larger conversation of, you know, vaccine makers maybe needing to modify their recipes to work better against this variant. So I think the fear now is that, you know, if we don't prepare for the worst case scenario, then things could be headed in a really bad direction. And it's that fear of, you know, returning back to square one that people might really want to avoid at this point. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the direction we're headed in right now.
Dave Keating, again, there was a disagreement between EU leaders when it comes to COVID restrictions. That sort of masks disagreement that was also front and center over whether or not to pool their resources, and certainly when it comes to purchasing energy, something that Spain had been talking about. One of the knock-on effects of COVID has been that we have an energy crisis right now, and that idea seems to have fallen through for now.
Yeah, there was a big dust-up about this last night. Of course, we all know in our daily lives that energy prices are increasing, and there's all kinds of different ideas about what governments can do about that. Economists say there isn't so much governments can do about that, but Spain is really pushing for some direct market intervention. But the Northern Europeans, the Netherlands, the Nordics, they don't like market intervention. They don't like this idea. So there's been a big disagreement about that. And then the Eastern Europeans, last night the Czechs and the Poles tried to bring in the emissions trading system, saying that the rising energy prices are the fault of the EU's climate legislation. There's absolutely no evidence for that, but the conversation got completely hijacked by the Czechs and Poles last night. Pedro Sanchez was furious about this. You could see it at his press conference afterwards. He was very angry that the Czechs and Poles were bringing this ETS climate legislation stuff into what he thinks needs to be resolved very quickly and as an entirely separate issue. In the end, they had to give up on issuing any conclusions on energy prices. That is extremely unusual for something that was on the agenda. So it shows just how big that disagreement is on this area of whether or not government should intervene on energy. And this is a single market, so the governments can't do it on their own. There's got to be an EU consensus here.
All right, EU leaders divided over pooling energy purchase. The European Central Bank divided over whether to pull on the emergency brake and raise rates to slow inflation. The Germans and the Dutch don't like it, but theirs is a minority view.
Inflation is expected to remain elevated in the near term, but should ease in the course of next year. The inflation outlook has been revised up, but inflation is still projected to settle below our 2% target over the projection horizon.
So, Catherine Field, that's the glass half full view put forth by Christine Lagarde. Remember, we're in the throes of the highest inflation since the 1980s right now.
We are, and it's a real problem for governments because inflation does create a distrust of governments. The whole political process, you have questions about it. But it is a difficult problem at the moment because you do have these enormously high energy prices at the moment, which is very difficult to do anything about that. You also have the chains, that bring us products. Everyday products are more expensive because we have the supply chain issues. So, but then she's talking about 2% inflation. Look on the other side of the channel. What are they talking about now for inflation in the next year? They would be dreaming in the UK if they could only have 2% inflation. So, yeah, it's bad, but I don't think we should be ringing alarm bells talking about Weimar Republic type status just yet.
All right, raising rates, that's just what they'd be expecting Turkey to do. Instead, Recep Tayyip Erdogan keeps burning through cash, finance ministers and central bank governors. The latest rate hike cut, that's right, it was a cut, not a rise. It was greeted with a thud. The lira dropping another 8% in trading this Friday. Turkey's currency has now lost 55% of its value this year and prompted protests like the one that attracted thousands in Istanbul last Sunday.
We are both working in my household. One salary goes to the rent and the other pays the electricity, gas and water bills. It's really hard to get by nowadays. We're among the workers who earn the minimum wage. If only it would go up to 5,200 Turkish lira, we could live a bit more decently.
Okay, so it's not Weimar, but it's bad.
I mean, what's crazy is that, Weimar was in a way not the policy of the German government back then. It's extraordinary to watch what appears to be a sort of self-inflicted economic crisis created.
Why does he do it? Why?
He does not believe in interest rates. He thinks that interest rates are sinful. I think that's the root of it. He opposes those interest rates. But I think there's another dimension is that, his whole coalition is dependent on developers and certain businesses that benefit from these lower rates. And what many have noted is that, in effect, what you have is a massive transfer of wealth from people who have savings, office workers, and people with government salaries who tend to vote against the AK party, towards those big businesses and developers, and those people who are on the bottom end of the economic spectrum, the taxi drivers, grocers, and so on. They're not as affected by this inflation as the middle class is.
So how long can he just ride this wave?
This is an experiment, and we're in uncharted territory. I don't think that there's ever been there's been countries that have had inflation crises before with currency, runs on their currency and so on. But I don't think that we've ever seen the country's actual leadership creating an inflation crisis like this actively, despite being warned constantly every single day that he shouldn't be doing this. So I don't know how long he can keep doing it before. Elections are in 2023, and we'll see if that is the end of the Erdogan era.
Noor Ibrahim, how much of an issue is inflation where you are?
I mean, in the U.S., it's at a 40-year high right now, and this is, this would be easier to navigate if, we could chart things and, we can expect a boom in a surge in the virus in January or in the spring, but there's just no way to plan accordingly. And that's why, like I said before, you just have to prepare for the worst case scenario and just see what happens. But yeah, it's definitely an issue here, and as it is, across the world right now.
Yeah, so uncertainty all around. Britain, as Catherine was mentioning, raising its rates on Thursday. Its central bank governor points to that great unknown, volatile fuel prices, which are at the heart of all this. These days, they're on the rise again.
They went up a lot, obviously, post-August, having seen them come off a bit. They're now going back up again. I think this is directly related to some of the tensions we're seeing on the border between Russia and Ukraine, where a lot of Europe's gas supply comes through.
Blame it on Russia, Catherine?
Yeah, blame it on Russia. I mean, yes, Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader, keeps saying, my hands are clean, it's nothing to do with me, don't look here, look in your own backyard. But yeah, there certainly are questions to be asked about the supply of gas coming through the Ukraine, coming to Western Europe, yeah.
I mean, that's just one input. I mean, like, we're going through a massive sort of injections in the United States, in the EU. We're going through these massive, it's like, you learn it in secondary school economics. When you pump a lot of money and just start printing money, in this case, to alleviate some of the hardship of the COVID crisis, and just dump that money into the economy, you're going to get inflation. So that's just like, that may be that's the bigger kind of pillar of the inflation crisis right now, versus the supply chain difficulties or even the rising fuel prices. We've had those before, the other ones. What we haven't had is this massive Keynesian injection of cash into the world economy, and that's basically the consequence of that. You're going to get inflation. Again,
at the conclusion of that EU summit, Dave Keating, which is it more? I mean, we're seeing even the frugal Dutch this week. They have a new coalition, and they're talking about big spending programs, like Borzu was saying. If you inject a lot of cash, there's going to be ripple effects. Or is it all about Russia?
I mean, I think it seems obvious that the big spending plans are at least partially driving this inflationary trend, because it is happening most in the countries with the big stimulus packages. What's interesting is that the US and the UK on one hand are responding to this quite differently than the ECB on the other hand. The ECB on Thursday said it does not intend to raise rates at all, even throughout 2022. And there's been speculation that the US Fed might raise rates 3 times next year. They are both phasing out their bond buying, which is supposed to alleviate the interest raising a bit, but the ECB is doing that much slower. The European Central Bank is doing that much slower than the US or the UK. They said they're going to phase out the bond buying up until March next year. So the ECB is being a lot more, let's say, less panicked about this. And part of that is because the interest rate here is not as high as in the US or the UK. It's 5% in November here, which is the highest it's ever been in the history of the euro, but that's compared to 7% in November in the US. So I think attitudes here are a little more relaxed, but people are still very, very nervous, I think. And of course, there was disagreement on the ECB Board of Governors about these decisions, about the timeline for phasing out bond buying and whether they should stick so resolutely against raising the interest rate here.
And while that EU summit was going on, we had the Ukrainian president in Brussels meeting the NATO Secretary General. So there is this, and there was a lot of talk at the outset of the summit about Russia and the troop buildup near Ukraine's border. All this is adding to the general mood of uncertainty. I guess that's the word of the week, uncertainty. At the heart of the standoff with Russia is Germany and its new chancellor, Olaf Scholz, seen here attending his very first European summit since his swearing in. His baptism of fire on Russia came the previous day in Berlin, when a court handed down a life sentence to a 56-year-old Russian national who, under a false identity, executed a Chechen commander in broad daylight in a public park in the German capital in August of 2019. He then ditched his gun, his bicycle, and a wig in the River Spree.
Dieser Mord in staatlichem Auftrag, wie vom Gericht.
This murder by order of the state, as determined by the court today, is a grave breach of German law and the sovereignty of the Federal Republic of Germany.
Wir haben daher gerade eben den Botschafter
We
Russlands.
have therefore just summoned the ambassador of Russia for a meeting. The ambassador was informed that the two members of the embassy staff would be declared persona non grata.
Zu unerwünschten Personen erklärt werden.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. Catherine Field, first off, the Russians, yeah, they like to leave a calling card. But to have the guy caught like that so easily?
Yeah, there's clearly a problem with logistic planning there. I think I'm finding Germany and Russia really interesting at the moment because we're seeing a whole new Ostpolitik come out. We've had Angela Merkel for all this time, who's always gone for German economic interests, when that was the underlying message with relations with Russia. Now we're seeing with the Greens and with the SPD and the coalition, we're seeing them talking much more about rule of law, democracy, having that part of it as well. And I was actually quite surprised that they came down so hard on these diplomats, because if you remember back in October, there was the unfortunate incident in Berlin of the Russian intelligence officer who died falling out of the window of the Russian embassy in Berlin. And that was completely swept under the carpet. Apparently, Merkel's government asked for a clarification, nothing came. We didn't hear anything more of it. So I think it's interesting that we're now seeing a real shift in Germany's relationship, and that they're going to get tougher exactly at a time when democracy needs to be strengthened.
Bozo Dargai?
I mean, I think the Russians have been running these kind of clandestine wet operations across Europe for years, maybe forever. And they have usually targeted Russian nationals, and when there is impunity, when there are no consequences, they will continue to run these kinds of operations. And, I think that...
But this time again, the guy gets caught.
But, I mean, I think that he was probably just one guy in a much more complex operation, A. B, as we've seen in the sort of Salisbury debacle a couple years ago, these GRU guys are not perhaps the best in the field, at what they're doing. And also, I just think that their methods are a little bit outdated. And you see that with other countries as well. They have not updated their tradecraft to account for the prevalence of cell phone cameras and the prevalence of CCTVs all over Western cities right now. And so they're still acting like it's 1973 and they're whacking some dude in Helsinki, whereas the reality is that everything is surveyed all the time. And so it's very hard to get away with this kind of operation.
Dave Keating, what do you make of the fact that the German court was unequivocal? Of course, the government had to act since the German court said that because they had cross-checked that he was under a false identity, they uncovered the killer's real identity, that it was a state-sponsored killing.
Well, what was interesting to me also was the strength of the German response, because under Angela Merkel, Germany's basically had a turn the other cheek attitude toward Russia and all of these interferences that Russia has had on German soil. I mean, Germany has been remarkably restrained, considering there were allegations of Russia tapping the German parliament. There was Alexei Navalny, who had to fly to Germany after he was poisoned, then he was sent back. There were allegations of spying on Angela Merkel's office, and each time Merkel's response was very soft. But it's taken the Green Party, which ironically is in many ways the most hawkish party in German politics in terms of standing up to China, standing up to Russia, and it took a Green foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, to actually get tough with Russia. So I think the Greens' presence in that coalition is what is driving a more aggressive by German standards, foreign policy. And we're going to continue to see that trend with Baerbock there as foreign minister. This is a new era, I think, for the way that Germany will be responding to these things. That being said, it is still Germany. They're not going to respond like France when things like that happen.
Yeah, all right. So does that mean that they will or they won't opened the tap on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which goes directly from Russia to Germany?
Well, that's the big question. Baerbock obviously wants that pipeline stopped. She's wanted it for a long time. Washington wants that pipeline stopped, but it's almost done. It's ready to start pumping gas momentarily, really. Olaf Scholz has kept his cards close to his chest about whether, in the event of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, they would cancel that pipeline. It would be a big deal if they canceled it. It's been being worked on for many years. It would leave Germany in a very difficult position. If suddenly they didn't have that gas, they would have to rely more on coal in the short term. It's not something Scholz wants to do, but I think he is much more willing to consider it than Merkel ever was.
Noor Ibrahim, your thoughts on this, and also on Boris suggesting that the Russian intelligence services just ain't what they used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is coming at a time where there's just a renewed wave of pressure on Russia from the West. And I think that this new chancellor really has a chance and some leverage here, especially when it comes to the pipeline, which I think that would be a case of, really hitting them where it hurts. It would send a strong message. It would definitely be an embarrassment for Putin. And I think, what more reason would you need for that? I mean, obviously there's the whole Ukraine situation, what just happened with the sentencing and, having a hitman take part in an operation like this on German soil. Yes, they get sloppy, but apparently that doesn't stop them from planning these things. I don't think it will. And I think that that's why, that kind of, that streak of really hostile behavior warrants as tough of a response as possible.
Catherine Field?
Back to the pipeline. There was a really interesting stalling mechanism in the last few days where, of course, the German Chancellor and the Foreign Minister has said they need to have the green light from the German regulator.
So wait, you started the show, by the way, saying it was soon party over for Boris Johnson. Are you saying it's soon party over for Nord Stream 2?
Well, they're kicking it down the road, aren't they? They're not going to get the answer until second half of 2022, which is really smart politics. They have finally come around to what the US has been saying is, look, Russia is up to no good in Ukraine. Be careful, something's going to happen there. And to be able to kick it down the road like this, and they say, look, we're just doing the paperwork here.
I mean, the Russians have been doing these kinds of things in Europe for, centuries, really. And the message is clear. The reason for the sloppiness and the lack of kind of professionalism is also in a way clear, is that, the message is, look, we don't care. If you betray us, if you're against us, we'll get you wherever you are. So it does, in a way, from the point of view of Vladimir Putin, it doesn't matter that this guy got caught. He's just another pawn. But it sends the message, it sends a terrifying message that if you are against me, you think you can go to Germany, you think you can go to the UK, I'll still come and get you. Yeah.
All right. Before we go, first, it was Time magazine naming Elon Musk as its Person of the Year. That reignited the hot stove debate on social media. Is the founder of Tesla and SpaceX, or the big boss at Tesla and SpaceX, a superhero with a Midas touch for innovation, or a supervillain who dodges tax and pollutes both the planet and now outer space? This week, it was the Financial Times' turn to name Musk its Person of the Year. He granted an interview where he was his usual understated self, quote, "I'm just trying to get people to Mars and enable freedom of information with Starlink, accelerate sustainable technology with Tesla, free people from the drudgery of driving." Answering his critics, he said, "It's certainly possible that the road to hell is to some degree is paved with good intentions, but the road to hell is mostly paved with bad intentions." Your thoughts on this, Dave Keating? Is he the Person of the Year?
I'm baffled by this, frankly. I mean, I know that the Person of the Year is a moral judgment. It's not saying the person is a good person, and we can see that obviously with Persons of the Year in the past. But I don't really get this argument that he's been incredibly transformative. I mean, if he's been as transformative as they're saying, why aren't there more electric vehicles on the road right now? I think the proof will be in the pudding in 5 years, whether or not Tesla specifically has made a big difference in the rollout of electric vehicles. And then in terms of his own personal missions into outer space, I think that's just a personal endeavor. I don't see how that's transforming. We're not all going to be flying to the moon in 10 years. I don't see how he is societally transformational, so I don't get it.
Well, first of all, hold on, I'll put it to you, Catherine. He's turning a profit with Tesla, which some said would never happen. Secondly, that mission to outer space is also because in the medium term, he wants to get those low orbit satellites up so that you can have those driverless cars on the road everywhere.
Yeah, there are two sides to him. Yes, there's the driverless cars, there's electric cars, there's this amazing tubular train that's now running into trouble in California. You've also got, they're not going into space, let's be honest here. These guys aren't sort of heading towards the moon. These are very...
He said Mars, huh?
Yeah, Mars, yeah. Well, let's see how far they've got now. They've got to the edge of space, and it's for zillionaires, billionaires, and their cronies who are on these. And plus, as for these satellites, talk to astronomers. They're not very happy about all these low-orbit satellites there because they are affecting the light. They're affecting areas of the world which usually be in darkness. You're seeing lots of the night sky being changed. Now, I'm going to change the conversation a bit. Who should have had it? Who should be Person of the Year? And I want to know why it didn't go to the German-Turkish couple who were the brains and the scientists behind the Pfizer jab. I mean, Europe needs first-generation immigrant success stories. We haven't had any. This couple didn't get anything from the Nobel Peace Prize, Nobel Medicine, and suddenly we're looking at this guy.
Noor Ibrahim, I mean, your thoughts listening to Catherine.
Yeah, I mean, of course we're looking at this guy because, you just take a look at his Twitter account and it's entertaining. It's entertaining for people. And, I think it's less about him being a villain and more about it's just a person who's lost touch with reality. I think the tremendous amount of success he's had and the power that he wields has created some kind of monster, really, because, everything he said in terms of, COVID restriction stuff, that really terrible comment he made to Bernie Sanders a few weeks ago. This is someone who's just, who lives in his own bubble. And I don't know if he realizes that everything he says has such a big impact. So,
but it does,
yeah, I think,
Noor.
again, less about
Noor, it does have an
him.
impact. I mean, he's got legions of fans.
That's what I said.
He's a rock star.
Yeah, I said, exactly. That's what I'm saying is I don't know if he realizes, if he thinks, for 5 minutes before tweeting or saying something like that. And he should because of the consequences that play out almost immediately after he drops a tweet.
Borzu Dargahi?
I think that Elon Musk is not just the person of the year, he's sort of the person of the era. And I mean it in the sense of this sort of dark post-liberal capitalism kind of almost neo-feudal world where billionaires are just these incredibly powerful figures that lord over our lives, and that they're able to get up on Twitter and comment about everything and talk about whatever they want, and they're listened to, like the way that people go to Bill Gates and just like, he's almost like a feudal overlord.
Is this Darth Vader, or is this like Tony Stark, of the Avengers movies?
I don't want to get into that judgment. I don't want to get into whether he's a good guy or a bad guy, but I will say that he's symptomatic, not necessarily emblematic, symptomatic of our era of polarization and inequality and the adoration and extremely unhealthy power of the super, 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 super rich.
Dave Keating?
I would agree with that, actually. I mean, I think, part of the goal of these designations of the year people is that they're supposed to be symbolic of an era. And I think that is a fairly convincing reason to make him Person of the Year in a very depressing, very negative way. But yeah, that's a convincing argument.
Catherine, a final word on this?
Listen, the guy leaves me cold. He doesn't pay enough taxes. He's got these cars. I mean, he's now going to Germany to try and teach the Germans how to build cars. Well, good luck with that.
Chopping down a forest to do it.
He's chopping down a forest outside of
Is that new green German foreign minister going to do something about that?
It was foreign minister, that's environment. And he's got this big factory in Berlin where he held this big rave. Other companies are making electric cars. The fact that we're talking about them shows that, maybe...
But I think it's important to note people like this, not necessarily lionize them, not necessarily demonize them, but sort of kind of ascribe to them what they signify, and it's the sort of the terribleness of where we live, and it's not necessarily his fault as a person, and so on. You give someone all this money, all this power, no accountability basically, and he's basically just above everything. And there's a few figures like that in the world right now, and he opines about everything. As Noor noted, he's sitting there. Popping off about COVID restrictions and so on. What does he know about public health?
Yeah.
All right. Well, what we do know is that there are more surprises to come. By the way, programming note, next Monday, our look back at 2021 with the world this year. And next Friday, it'll be the world in 2022. We'll find out if your predictions about Boris Johnson are going to turn true. Catherine Field, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Borzu Daragahi, Noor Ibrahim in New York City, and Dave Keating in Brussels. Thank you for being with us here in the world this week.